Hollywood Reporter is sticking to this idea that Warner Brothers has dropped, allegedly, nearly $400 million on this movie, which would
budget
be
or with marketing?
No, that's just production.
Okay.
Renegade Online. Now, the interesting thing is that James Gunn has pretty much flat out denied this, saying that, no, this is ridiculous. It's not that. And this all stems from a report that was filed a year ago, which means it would have been for things that happened the year prior to that, where they told the state of Ohio, in order to obtain film tax credits, that their expected expenditure was going to be $360 million. Now, if that's true, okay, that means that $360 million would be the gross they'd probably get. Usually you can get for movies of that scale somewhere around 20% of that back. So they might be getting $60 to $75 million of that 360 back, which would put it in the high 200s, which I'd be more inclined to believe. James Gunn is saying that, nope, he pushed back on this Hollywood Reporter report. And Hollywood Reporter said, nope. They pushed back on James Gunn and said, no, this is what we got, right? And it's all based on this report.
Is Hollywood Reporter allowed to do that? Aren't they? Aren't they drive-by media?
Yes.
Access media?
They are access media. That's
so
for sure.
they are doubling down on this story.
Yep.
What do you make of that?
Well, in this case, I mean, they're going by, again, this report that was filed by the production entity with Ohio. Now, again, you can either think that they're making their best estimate of what they think will happen based on X, Y, and Z. May or may not come to fruition that way. I don't know how Ohio works versus Georgia versus California versus the UK when it comes to their film tax credit filings. They're all different. But this goes back to what they said. Last year, documents filed by the Superman production team with the Ohio state government listed a gross budget of $363.8 million, a figure submitted in order to secure tax incentives. Okay. And again, they're submitting that usually up front. They're estimating, in this case, again, in the UK, you're usually filing in arrears after the money's been spent, which I'm sure you have to do the same thing in Ohio too eventually. And I don't know if this is the same kind of thing or not, but it was something that James Gunn pushed back on. How in the world do they think they know what our budget is? Asked James Gunn. He offered no alternative figure at the time, instead framing the report as misinformed. Since then, DC has alluded to a $225 million net budget, factoring in tax breaks and incentives. That I can find to be very feasible for this movie. So again, there's this kerfuffle about how much this movie costs. I'm sure there's probably going to be more information. They're obviously following these filings that they've made in the state of Ohio. And eventually they're going to have to continue to file updated figures in order to secure the film tax credits that they want to get. So I'm assuming that these figures are going to be updated as we go forward. But it goes to show you the amount of money that's being spent right now. We know Jurassic World Dominion, at the very least, allegedly is going to come in much cheaper than Fallen Kingdom, Rebirth is going to come in cheaper than Dominion and Fallen Kingdom. Dominion was the last one, the third one. They spent a ton of money on those things, but we're still looking at a movie that's probably going to cost $300 million. You got Fantastic Four this summer that's going to $300+ million, I'm sure. How to Train Your Dragon, not real sure on that one. I don't know if I've seen any final figures, but I mean, that wouldn't surprise me at all to be around 150 to 200 million for that sucker. So we got a lot of really expensive movies coming out this summer. And some of these things are probably going to be fine, make money. Some of them are not. But Superman, I mean, everything kind of hangs in the balance apparently for Warner Brothers right now, or at least that's the perception that's out there, that this hangs Warner Brothers hangs it in the balance for Warner Brothers on the success or failure of this movie. And I guess the question becomes, what are we going to define apart from the obvious of, at least trying to break even at the theater. What are we going to define as success for this? Guys, what do y'all, is anybody here excited about seeing this new iteration of Superman?
Well, I got to slide out, so I'll hop in first real quick just to say that at $400 million, if that's the production budget, we don't know that it is, but that's what's being reported. You add on to that, they're saying that they are spending $200 million, which is $50 million more than usual on marketing. You get to a film that needs like $1.1 billion to break even. That's crazy. That's what Disney would spend on like a major Avengers film, and you could say, well, Superman, that's as big as Avengers, and it's like, yeah, but Warner Brothers is nowhere near as big as Disney, and so to spend this kind of money, and let's say it's $100 million less or $200 million less, whatever you want to say, it's still a huge investment as a percentage from Warner Brothers.
Yep.
They're going all in on Superman. I don't know how wise this is, simply because I don't know what they do if it's a success. I know what they do if it's a failure. That's the end. But if it's a success, I don't know where they go with this, considering they really don't have a good plan for Batman. They don't really have a good plan for their secondary and tertiary characters. Mm-mm. James Gunn could pull a rabbit out of a hat with this one, and that would be fantastic. But the question is, how many more rabbits does he have?
So, yeah, it stems from this article from Hollywood Reporter, and this is kind of what it all comes down to. And some of the figures are in here, the expectation that they could push past, for a big summer blockbuster movie like this, a movie that is this important to Warner Brothers, obviously. They could push past that $150 million mark when it comes to marketing and push towards $2 billion. The question is, what does the ultimate expense of this movie look like in terms of production? If it does net itself down to closer to $250, then okay, I mean, it's rare, but certainly for a movie like this, if you can get away with $250 on production and you throw another $200 million in global marketing, which, you're approaching a 1-to-1 ratio in marketing and production on a movie of this scale.
Isn't that the norm for the big budget films now?
Not always. I mean, it depends on what big budget. I mean, put it this way, $300 to $400 million was dropped on Snow White. They spent right at about slightly over $100 million on marketing. You reach a point for most movies where, for a big movie that you're going to release in tons of international territories, basically a true global release, $100 million to $120 million is about what you need to do a pretty good marketing campaign globally. Okay. And that's why we kind of lean on these, and especially with Disney, that's where they usually tend to fall. Now, if you've got something serious and you really want to push hard, then you start pushing past that. You start pushing to 150, 175, 200 million could be. We don't know yet, because we're still several weeks away. We don't know yet how much of that is partnership marketing. It might be none of it. It might be that Warner Brothers is going to spend $200 million all on its lonesome around the world, with probably something like 75 to 100 million of it here alone in the U.S., and then, the rest of it internationally. That is possible. And then they probably will still have another $100 to $200 million in partnerships with other people, kind of adding that on. Case in point, the big Fortnite event just finished, right, with Star Wars. They had the live event yesterday. It was actually one of the coolest, probably the coolest Star Wars thing I've seen since Disney bought it. But it was because it was made by Epic Games and put in Fortnite, and you had to blow up the Death Star. And that was the end to the season. The end of the season, it gave to the next chapter in Fortnite, which, guess what it is, kids? DC, David Corenswet's Superman. So that's about like his version of Superman, and the new DC universe is about to start popping up in what is still the biggest video game audience that exists on the planet, in Fortnite. So you're going to be able to, get all these skins and characters when you get the new battle pass for the month or whatever. So stuff like that, obviously, and this stuff is set up years in advance, just like a McDonald's Happy Meal. I mean, they set these things up 2 years in advance, which is why we always joke about, why did all the Captain Falcon DEI stuff come out in February of 24? Because that's when McDonald's had it on the schedule. They didn't care that Disney had to delay the film an entire year. They put out the Captain America Happy Meal stuff, which none of the kids cared about anyway. So, but it was a year before the movie finally came out. So this kind of stuff is done in advance. So I'm curious to see how much of this is going to help kind of boost the notoriety of the film. A lot of this has to do with the fact that it was one of the biggest trailers on YouTube that Warner Brothers has had in some time. I think around the world it got 250 million views in the first 24 to 48 hours or something like that. So that's great. That's a good sign. I think people's curiosity will continue to push this movie, but you got any expectations for this one, Brett? Ron, I mean, old school, Superman, old school comic stuff. You have any interest in seeing this kind of as a more normie guy when it comes to these sort of movies?
Yeah, I mean, I think Superman can absorb that kind of change. There's always, we know that these characters evolve. We're not talking about a race switch or a gender switch. Let's see what you can do with the character. I mean, I remember my late father telling me the problem with Superman for him always was he was perfect. He was granite. You couldn't do anything with him. I was actually rereading Couldn't Do Anything with Him. Mm-hmm. And I was actually rereading the Kirby graphic novel biography.
Oh yeah, the old Jack Kirby stuff. Yeah.
And he talks about how, when they said at some point in the 70s, we got to get rid of the kryptonite, and we got to create characters who can, he was with DC from time to, he switched between DC and Marvel many times. We've got to create characters who can whip Superman's ass, because otherwise there's no tension there. So, all right, so let's see what else we can do.
I think the problem for this movie is that, look, for a movie, if this wants to get to $1 billion and comfortably give them a path forward with Superman as the head of this franchise. Now, I don't think it needs to make $1 billion to get there, but with the numbers that you're giving me for the high end of those budgets, problem is that that's not going to be achieved in an opening weekend. It's not even going to be achieved in 2 weekends, and that's a very busy July. So maybe it isn't going to be affected by Jurassic World, but not everybody can afford going to the movies 3 times a month. So perhaps some people end up going to Jurassic World and choosing that instead of Superman or Fantastic Four. But then after Superman, it runs headlong into Fantastic Four. And if it wants to get to $1 billion, it has to do something like what Maverick did, which was a halfway decent opening weekend, and then has to have strong holds week after week. But we know that superhero movies in general are not like that. The Marvel movies especially are very front loaded. And DC, on the other hand, also has to worry with the fact that they're still shaking off a really bad reputation with the way their last however many films have gone, right?
Oh, yeah.
They're not even Marvel tried to coast off the success of Deadpool and Wolverine leading into Cap 4 and, crappy New Avengers or whatever the hell that movie is, Thunderbolts. You've still got the stink of The Flash. You still have the stink of Aquaman. There isn't a whole lot there. The general consensus seems to be that the people like the trailer, but they haven't even let David Cornsweet run with it in a way that I want to. They've marketed it as a James Gunn movie more than anything else. And if you're going to put the ball in the hands of this dude and expect him to lead DC for the next 10 years as an actor, then you need to actually start showing that you have some faith in him. And I haven't seen them do that yet. And that's on top of the fact that I think James Gunn in general is online too much and too interactive with the audience. And he doesn't leave an air of mystery around anything that he's making. I think it needs to make like $800 million for them to consider this the type of thing that they would be a true success in a path forward. But even that, when you think about it, that's barely more than what they made for the Batman. And they're still trying to figure out the Batman too. Like Batman made like
750. Yeah. We were talking about the other day, the Robert Pattinson version, like the Chris Nolan movies from 10, 15 years ago now. I think it's still the gold standard. But, we don't have it from Box Office Pro yet. It doesn't go that far out. Yeah. But How to Train Your Dragon, they're looking at 75 to 100 million. I'm hoping that actually does better. It's comfortably over 100 million. We'll see. Elio looks like a train wreck. 25 to 30, a $300 million Disney Pixar fiasco, a movie that was made basically twice once again, because it's going to lose to 28 years later, which they're projecting with a $30 to $40 million budget. The trailer for that looks amazing. We saw it last night before Ballerina. But if you want to stretch it a little bit further out in the way too freaking early numbers, I'll give you this. If we go down here, this is from Box Office Theory. This is from Sean Robbins, who used to be the guy that wrote at Box Office Pro. And I subscribe to his blog and his Substack because he's got a lot of interesting information out there. And he's been pretty good in the past. He's very interesting to read. But again, the way too early kind of stuff. I mean, you look at Megan 2.0 coming out June 27th, between 23 and 32 million on its opening. You look at 28 years later, 42 to 50, kind of right in line with what we're seeing there. You look at How to Train Your Dragon. Now, he's got this between 67 and 77. We'll have to see. You know, he's lower than what the other ones are projecting, and we're not that far out. But go down here to look at Superman, 154 to 185 million.
Opening weekend, domestic or worldwide?
I believe he just pulls domestic on here that nobody really is able to predict. So, I mean, that would be phenomenal if that actually happens. I still think, and again, this is as of 6/5. This is more than a month before that movie opens. Yeah. So I think this is still early. I'll be really interested to see once we get, 2 weeks out. I'm throwing these numbers out here just to say this is where he's got them right now. This is today, right? He's got Fantastic Four at 125 million for its opening weekend.
July's a busy month.
Yeah, and I'm a little bit more tepid on that one because that one's 2 weeks after Superman. That's even further out. We're still 6-7 weeks away from that movie opening. But, he's doing his best based on data that he sees, based on his experience in the past. And like I said, I've been following him do this for years, so I'm going to throw it out there for what it is. But Jurassic World Rebirth, 70 to 80 million. I just can't imagine there being that much of a discrepancy between Jurassic World and Superman in terms of opening. He could be dead on right. We have no idea yet.
Does Jurassic World feel like the type of movie to you that's not going to be front loaded and will have more people show up after the first weekend?
If it's good.
I mean, all those movies make $1 billion.
Well, but what makes me nervous about this, I've said from the beginning, there is no Chris Pratt in this movie.
Yeah. I mean, Scarlett Johansson is a reputable and bankable actress. Now, whether you want to consider a lead, I get the point, right? Yeah. Like Chris Pratt is a leading man, and Scarlett Johansson, for being as famous as she is in Hollywood, isn't when you think of like an Angelina Jolie who carries a movie on her own if she needs to, which is interesting considering her profile. She is as well known as she is. But I mean, I think Chris Pratt played a role with it, but I also think that dinosaurs are just something people like, and it's possible that people will show up for it.
I remember the original dinosaurs, and people didn't like them nearly as much. It's amazing how they have just rebuilt their reputation.
The reason why Ron didn't like them is because, back in the olden days, every time they tried to have a Jewish holiday, there'd be some damn raptor at the window trying to break in and
hate it when that happens.
Eat dinner off the counter. Had to constantly change the loincloth.
It was a mess. It was a mess. It wasn't a good. It wasn't a good match.
Make sure you're subscribed to Valiant Renegade and join us every Sunday at 6 p.m. Eastern for the live show.